Here are 7 chilling stories of children who went missing and were never found again, dead or alive. Today's video was done in collaboration with World 5 List. Stay tuned to preview their special video on Madeleine McCann. Number 7. The 5 Missing Siblings. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, when George, Jenny Sodders, and 9 of their 10 children went to sleep. Around 1 a.m., a fire started at the Fayetteville home of the Sodders family. George was desperate to save 5 of his 10 children who were trapped upstairs. He wanted to use the ladder, but it was reportedly engulfed in flames. When he went to call the police, he noticed that the wires had been cut. In a last attempt to rescue his kids, George wanted to get help himself, but when he tried to start the engine of his truck, it wouldn't crank. One of the kids that managed to escape, Marion, ran to a neighbor's home to phone the firefighters, but when she did so, no operators answered. Another neighbor tried to call for help when she saw the Sodders house burning, but the same thing happened. Nobody answered. The children were presumed dead 45 minutes after the blaze erupted. However, the firefighters never found any bones in the fire remains. The 5 children, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8, and Betty 5, appeared to have disappeared in the smoke. The firefighters suggested that the fire had not been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies. However, a state police inspector attributed the blaze to faulty wiring, and the coroner's office issued 5 death certificates for the missing children, as if they had died in the fire. But George and Jenny Sodders had begun to wonder if there was a possibility for their kids to still be alive. They started to stitch together a series of events that led up to the moment of the fire. They remembered that a few months before the so-called accident, a stranger showed up at their house, pointed to 2 fuse boxes, and said, "This is going to cause a fire someday." George did not take the man too seriously back then, as he had recently had the wiring checked by the local power company. A couple of days later, a different man knocked on their door and tried to sell the Sodders life insurance. When George declined, the seller got angry and warned him that his house was about to go up in smoke and that his children were about to be destroyed. All of this was attributed to George's outspoken criticism of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, being told that he would have to pay for it someday. The Sodders family patriarch often engaged in heated arguments with the members of the Italian community in Fayetteville. As the family was talking about the eerie events, the older sons remembered that just before Christmas, they saw a man parking not far from the younger kids' school, watching them intently. On Christmas Eve, after the family had opened a few presents and everyone had gone to sleep, the phone rang. Jenny answered it, but informed the caller he had the wrong number after he had asked for an unfamiliar name. After she hung up, she noticed that all the downstairs lights were still on and the front door unlocked. She saw Marion sleeping on the couch in the living room and assumed the other children were upstairs in bed, so she turned out the lights and locked the door. But after she went to sleep, she was awoken once again, but this time by a loud bang on the roof and then a rolling noise. She dozed off again, and she was finally awoken by heavy smoke. George and Jenny started their own investigation and found out that the children had been seen the morning after the fire by a woman who said she had served them breakfast. Another woman working at a Charleston hotel claimed to have seen 4 of the 5 missing kids a week after the fire, accompanied by 2 women and 2 men. She said the adults were speaking Italian and did not allow her to talk to the children. Speculation emerged that the Sodders family was victimized by mafia arsonists. Although George and Jenny continued to search for their children for years, they never managed to get support from the local police, who declared the case closed. Despite their best attempts, the 5 missing kids were never found, dead nor alive. Number 6. The Beaumont Children. On January 26, 1966, 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Arna, and 4-year-old Grant Beaumont were enjoying a hot day at the beach in Glenelg, Adelaide, Australia. Jane, being the older sibling, was responsible for her younger brother and sisters, while their mother, Nancy, spent the morning with a friend, and their dad, Jim, was at work. The children boarded a public bus at around 10 a.m. and were supposed to be back by 2 p.m. for lunch. However, when they failed to return home at the established time, Nancy thought her children might have missed the bus. When the next bus arrived and the kids were nowhere to be found, their mother started to worry and called the police. Only the next day were the siblings declared missing. Soon after that, eyewitnesses said they had seen the three kids leaving the beach at around 10:15 a.m. Other people saw them around 11 a.m. playing with the sprinkler, along with a blonde man in a blue swimsuit. About 45 minutes later, Jane, Arna, and Grant were seen using a 1-pound bill to buy snacks, even though the children hadn't left the house with that much money. They were last seen by a local postman who said he spotted them leaving the beach alone and going towards Jetty Road around 3 p.m. The case of the missing Beaumont children triggered one of the largest investigations in Australian history and changed the way parents used to watch their kids up to that point. Every lead the police followed in order to find them led nowhere. The authorities even sought the help of paranormal investigators. The visit of a renowned Dutch parapsychologist and psychic, Gerard Croiset, caused a media circus. Croiset's senses brought him to a warehouse. Believing the bodies of the children had been buried there, they paid the owners $40,000 to demolish it. However, the Beaumont kids were never found. Their disappearance remains one of the most mysterious unsolved missing children cases. Number 5. Mark HIMEBAUGH. On November 25, 1991, around 3:30 p.m., 11-year-old Mark HIMEBAUGH noticed that a small fire had broken out near his home and asked permission from his mother, Maureen, to go and watch the firefighters who were fighting the blaze. She agreed, and while her son was in the neighborhood, she went to run an errand. Mark's mother was caught up in traffic for about 40 minutes. When she finally got home, she noticed that her son hadn't returned, but didn't immediately go searching for him, as she thought he was just playing with the kids in the neighborhood. However, Maureen never saw her boy again. He was declared missing, and the last time he had been seen by eyewitnesses, he reportedly had stopped to talk to two persons in a small white or gray car around 3:30 p.m. Authorities later published a sketch of the male passenger. However, neither of the two was ever identified by the police. Another anonymous witness claimed to have seen Mark talking to a young girl around his age, but the police never identified her either. As the years went by, there have been leads, but no arrests have been made. A former male prostitute from Philadelphia claimed a renowned pedophile named Butkovich might have been related to the case. He said that in 1993, Butkovich had shown him a video of a child who resembled Mark being sexually abused. However, the man was never charged in connection with the boy's disappearance. 25 years later, Mark HIMEBAUGH's case remains unsolved, but his mother Maureen says she will never lose hope. Number 4. Deborah Sanders. In September 1984, Norelle Sanders, who was living with her 1-year-old daughter Deborah in an apartment in Chicago, received a visit from the child's father and her estranged boyfriend, Odell Shepard. The two got into a violent fight, and when the conflict got physical, Odell snatched the little girl from her mother's arms and rushed out of the house. Deborah remained with her father for approximately 2 weeks until Odell called Norelle and offered to give her back in exchange for $2,000. Because she couldn't afford to pay this much to get her daughter back, Norelle alerted the police, but they were unsure how to proceed, as the couple was not legally married. It was unclear who had legal custody of the girl. With the situation unsolved, Deborah stayed with her father. Shortly afterwards, Odell took the girl with him to the funeral of a family member in Memphis. That was the last time she was seen. It took the police 1 year to take action, track Odell down, and arrest him. However, the little girl was nowhere to be found. He was charged with child abduction, but claimed that he had previously returned Deborah to her mother. After being imprisoned for 1 year, Odell was asked to produce Deborah in court after his release. When he failed to do so, the girl's father was once again in prison for civil contempt. Odell spent 10 years in jail. During the years, he never revealed what had happened to Deborah. To this day, nobody knows what happened to the child. Norelle died of a stroke in 1998, and Odell was finally released shortly after serving what is believed to be the longest sentence ever served for civil contempt. Number 3. Timothy PITZEN. On the morning of May 11, 2011, Jim PITZEN drove his 6-year-old son Timothy to his kindergarten in Aurora, Illinois. The boy got out of his father's Jeep, waved goodbye, and ran towards his teacher while carrying a Spider-Man backpack. Jim told him he loved him and left to work. That was the last time he saw his son. 30 minutes later, Timothy's mom and Jim's wife, Amy, told the teachers she had to pick the boy up for a family emergency. When Jim came back for his son a couple of hours later, he was surprised to hear that his wife had already picked him up. He immediately tried to call Amy, but there was no answer. 2 days after that, the woman called some of her friends and family to tell them her and Timothy were okay. Afterwards, she reportedly checked into a motel in Illinois by herself. The next day, Amy was found dead by the hotel employees after she had taken a fatal dose of antihistamines and slashed her wrists. She had also left a suicide note saying that Timothy was safe with people that would take care of him, but that he would never be found. That sparked controversy with the authorities, as they later found a stain of the boy's blood in his mom's car. However, relatives thought it was probably coming from a nosebleed Timothy had about a year before. Eyewitnesses said they had seen Amy and her son at a car repair shop, at a local zoo, and afterwards at the Key Lime Cove Resort. In the morning, the two allegedly went to a different resort in Wisconsin, where they spent the night. The last time Amy was seen alive was the next day around 11 p.m., checking into the Rockford Inn by herself. It appears that she was suffering from depression and that she had tried to kill herself once before. However, family and friends said that she had no reason to hurt her son. Even though there have been unconfirmed sightings of Timothy since he was declared missing, the boy was never found. The police have reasons to believe that Amy might have killed him and committed suicide afterwards. Number 2. Johnny Gosch. 12-year-old Johnny Gosch left home for his newspaper delivery route in his West Des Moines neighborhood in Iowa in the early morning of September 5, 1982. He took a red wagon with him, which he used to carry some of the newspapers. Johnny took his dog Gretchen with him and set off on his daily routine. However, later that day, the child's parents received numerous phone calls from furious neighbors claiming they had not received their newspaper. Some of them reported to have seen him talking to a man driving a Ford who stopped to ask for directions. His parents went to search for him and only found his red wagon abandoned in the grass near a street in West Des Moines, and his dog was wandering the streets alone, not far away from home. Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosch, reported that the boy had been kidnapped and insisted that the case had to be kept in the public eye. More so, 1 year later, she established a foundation in her son's name, pushing the legislation to call for an immediate police response regarding reports of missing children. In 1984, Johnny Gosch became one of the first faces to appear on a milk carton. Years later, his mother allegedly received several photos of a bound and gagged young boy in the mail, which was reputed to be Johnny. Over the next years, Noreen hired a private investigation and uncovered alleged evidence that her son had been sold to a pedophile ring. In addition to this, the woman claimed to have received a visit at her home in 1997 from a then 27-year-old Johnny Gosch. He allegedly told his mother he had been kidnapped, but had her promise not to make that information public, as that would put his life in danger. Johnny's father, who had divorced Noreen in 1993, was doubtful of the visit. To this day, Noreen claims her son escaped from his kidnappers, but lives under a false identity, afraid he could be captured again. However, authorities never confirmed his mother's theory. Johnny Gosch's disappearance story sparked multiple conspiracy theories, some of them even involving the White House. Number 1. Madeleine McCann. Doctors Jerry and Kate McCann from Leicestershire were vacationing in Praia da Luz, Portugal, along with their 3 children, Madeleine, age 3, and twins Sean and Emily, age 2. On May 3, 2007, around 8:30 p.m., the McCanns went to meet friends for dinner at a tapas bar in the resort where they were all staying. Because the place was not far from their holiday apartment, they decided to leave their sleeping children there, agreeing that they would come back to check on them from time to time. During the next hour, they took turns going to see if the children were all right. Each time they did so, the kids were safe. However, at around 10 p.m., when Kate and Jerry returned to the apartment, they only found the twins. Madeleine was missing, and the window in her bedroom was open. They alerted the authorities, and on May 14th, the police named British expat Robert Murrett, who lived next to the resort, a primary suspect in the case after they were anonymously tipped off. Despite the fact that Murrett was considered to be an arguido, the Portuguese legal term for suspect, he was never arrested. Approximately 4 months later, on September 7th, Kate and Jerry McCann were also named arguidos by the detectives. Authorities did not exclude the possibility that Madeleine's parents were complicit in their daughter's disappearance. The suspect status was only lifted off the MCCANNs in July 2008, after the Portuguese Attorney General declared that all existing avenues of investigation had been exhausted. However, Madeleine's parents did not give up trying to find their daughter. In July 2010, they met with then Home Secretary Theresa May to discuss the search for the toddler. In April 2012, British detectives declared they had reasons to believe Madeleine could still be alive. A computer-generated image of how she might have looked at age 9 was released, but the Portuguese police refused to reopen the case. 2 years later, they did reopen the case after claiming their own review had uncovered new leads. However, the MCCANNs never managed to find Madeleine. In February 2017, almost a decade after their daughter's disappearance, they are still trying to find her. They are presently fighting with a former Portuguese police officer who wrote a book claiming Kate and Jerry McCann faked their daughter's kidnapping in order to cover up her alleged accidental death.
Now, if you're not familiar with this case, here's what you need to know. The 3-year-old Madeleine McCann mysteriously vanished from the holiday apartment in Portugal that her parents had rented almost 10 years ago. The world became absolutely fascinated by this disappearance, and despite the fact that thousands of children go missing around the world, she was thrust into the spotlight.